damn snapper out there.
1965. America at war.
Taking sand, man. Drop back about 5 meters. 5 meters.
The U.S. sends 500,000 troops. Their strategy is attrition. Kill more soldiers than North Vietnam can afford to lose.
We're still beating through the bush. We estimate there were 3 to 5 of them, over. Hey, Doc, patch them up. What'd you say, Shootout?
The other one had gray cast.
This guy's a local force type. He claims there were 30 NVA with him. Be careful, though. If there are 30 of them out there and you make contact, you'll have a fight on your hands, over.
Freedom was in jeopardy, and a struggling people had been brought almost to their knees by aggression when William Westmoreland was called to urgent duty. His mission was to deny aggression its conquest. It was a mission simple enough to state. But to execute that mission, he had to fight the most complex war in all American history.
Between 1965 and 68, the period of maximum U.S. combat involvement, the conduct of the ground war is the responsibility of General William Westmoreland, Westy to his troops.
Our mission was to protect South Vietnam from being overwhelmed by the aggressive forces from the north. And I was told by Mr. McNamara on innumerable occasions, that I should ask for the troops I felt needed to bring about that end result. And that I should not worry about the public opinion, I should not worry about the economy, I should not even concern myself as to the availability of the troops.
March 1965. The first American combat troops, 3,500, land at Da Nang. Their initial mission is to defend U.S. air bases. But as the U.S. bombs the north and the communists attack air bases in the south, General Westmoreland then requests more combat troops.
The strategy that had been enunciated by Washington at that time was through the use of air power, the graduated response. It was essential that our airfields be secure. We had sufficient instance to convince me that since the strategy was dependent on those airfields, we could not totally depend on the Vietnamese to defend them. The initial ground troops were asked for to defend key airfields.
In 65, the main U.S. air bases are at Da Nang in the north, at Quy Nhon and Bien Hoa near Saigon, and at Cam Ranh Bay on the coast.
Now, once those troops were at those bases, it made no sense at all to have them dig in and go strictly on the defensive. In addition to that, this is very injurious to the morale of your troops because they realize that they're sitting ducks to be attacked based on the initiatives of the enemy who selects the time and place of attack. And therefore they are sitting ducks to become very vulnerable. This is basic to anybody who's had any military experience, has any understanding of military tactics.
Some policymakers argue for a cautious military strategy, saying the defense of these bases or enclave positions is enough. Presidential advisor Kenneth Galbraith.
Then the enclave policy, which was perhaps the most popular solution with which I was identified, was that we just pull back and wait, and eventually some sort of a negotiated solution would emerge. In the meantime, there wouldn't be very many lives lost, either on our side and the country or the countryside, and that time would work its own solution.
To surrender the initiative to the enemy and to dig in encaves on the defensive was, in my opinion, a self-defeating procedure.
In 1965, the South Vietnamese Army is losing the war. It numbers 500,000 men. This is 5 times the size of the communist force. But it is poorly motivated and poorly led.
The Vietnamese were losing about a battalion a week. Battalion after battalion was being destroyed by virtue of the North Vietnamese troops or the so-called Viet Cong main force troops.
The communist guerrillas operate from jungle bases and sympathetic villages. By 1965, they control half the countryside. An estimated 34,000 North Vietnamese enter the South. The rate increases each year. Inside South Vietnam, they go underground. A network of tunnels is constructed, some extending for 12 miles. They can hide companies of several hundred men. From the tunnels, they operate in small, highly mobile units. This U.S. Army training film shows American countermeasures. Specially trained GIs called tunnel rats destroy the entrances. The tunnels are intricate with specially constructed bamboo chambers. Hand grenades are often rolled in to close up the entrances. But the tunnels have many exits and explosives have little effect. A later technique uses acetylene gas. The gas is pumped from drums into the tunnel complex. Then detonated by dynamite. This destroys the entire length of the tunnel, but the tunnels account for many communist successes. Westmoreland's main tactic is called search and destroy. The intention is to locate communist main force units in the jungle and fight them. The Vietnamese tactic is ambush, quick engagement, and quick retreat. According to the Vietnamese, the Americans have bogged down. Hanoi strategist Ha Van Lao.
Le GI est un combattant.
The GI was a fighter who we believed had a certain technical and theoretical education.
Formation technique et théorique. Il était très bien équipé.
He was very well equipped and trained. Nevertheless, even though he was a fighter in an army as sophisticated as the American army, he did not adapt easily to the conditions of war in Vietnam.
Dans les conditions de la guerre au Vietnam.
Particularly in the jungle, in the swamps and the countryside. He was so heavily equipped that he could not move around easily and made himself a vulnerable target for our guerrillas.
As the infiltration from the north increases, Westmoreland requires more and more reinforcements. By mid-1966, his first year in command, he gets almost 300,000 combat troops. communist units are located, massive firepower is brought in. Within minutes, fighter bombers can reach any area. Naval firepower. Destroyers can hit targets 23 miles inland. Westmoreland develops a new tactic called fire-base support. These are hilltop artillery positions. From these, combat patrols move within range of the supporting fire. Westmoreland is under intense political pressure to reduce his combat casualties. Field units can call for swift evacuation. Using medevac or ambulance helicopters, the wounded are lifted direct from combat zones to base hospitals. Westmoreland's multi-purpose helicopter war greatly reduces troop losses. For the seriously wounded, the survival rate is twice that of the Korean War.
1-4! Give me emergency medevac.
Every type of surgery is close to the combat zone. The communists, too, remain close to the battle. And with their sanctuaries in neutral Laos and Cambodia, they can choose when to fight. Their strategy is to outweight America.
I've had 3 meetings with Ambassador Bunker and 3 with General Westmoreland. I had coffee with him at length this morning, just before I came here. Our American people like when we get in a contest of any kind, whether it's in a war or an election or in a football game or what it is, they want it decided and decided quickly and get in or get out, and they like for that curve to rise like this, and they like for the opposition to go down like this.
Despite President Johnson's public show of optimism, his cabinet is divided. Defense Secretary McNamara has serious doubts. He wants to stop raising the troop level. The bombing of North Vietnam is still Johnson's main strategy. He again increases the airstrikes. The North, in turn, intensifies the ground war, and Westmoreland again requests more troops.
Because of the intelligence that we're receiving on the movement of North Vietnamese troops from north to south and the general buildup of the enemy forces. From the standpoint of myself, the military commander responsible on the scene, if we had not responded to that buildup, we could have found ourselves fighting with odds against us.
Each side responds with more troops. An urgent conference in Hawaii now commits a flow of men and material. October '66. Another 15,000 troops are welcomed ashore. Within days, there will be fighting in the remote highlands. Westmoreland now commands 350,000 troops, and on his recommendation, Johnson agrees to a huge increase. Within a few months, there will be 500,000. By now, America's Pacific allies are in the war. South Korea sends 45,000 troops. Thailand sends a volunteer infantry regiment. The Philippines dispatches a 2,000-man civic action team. The Australians, the first to arrive, increase their combat force to 7,000 troops. New Zealand dispatches a 500-man artillery battery.
And when forces were committed, I tried to put enough force, put enough military power into the effort that would assure success, but also minimize casualties.
In 1965, Westmoreland is Time magazine's Man of the Year. 5,000 Americans die in action in 1966, nearly 4 times the 1965 total. The war is escalating. By 1967, Westmoreland claims a major turnabout. He says Americans are now ambushing the communists. But critics begin to accuse Westmoreland of false optimism. In November 67, he visits Washington.
I could quote a number of meaningful statistics, such as the roads that are being opened, increasing number of enemies that have been killed, the number of defectors that are coming in from the communist side of the government, the number of weapons being captured, and other statistical information which suggests that we are making progress and we are winning.
Westmoreland stresses that victory depends on American resolve. He asks for 50,000 more troops. Defense Secretary McNamara is strongly against this. President Johnson decides on a first-hand assessment. In December 67, he visits Cam Bay. Johnson agrees to more troops. Westmoreland's tactics remain unchanged.
But then the tracks we found in the stream indicate that there was somebody going down this way in the stream. So maybe there's 3 of them. We'll find it. Who's that shooting? Come out! Hey, Sam, drop down a little further over there. The machine guns are going to stay in place. Stay down there around the CP and guard the CP. Take your time and try to toss it right in there. Don't expose yourself too long. Get all the way down. Grenade, hit the ground. All right, that was a good one. That one was dead in there. Hey, don't throw any more grenades in there. That's enough to kill a damn horse. Hey, Scott, get back out the way. Johnson is going in there with a pistol. LeClaire?
The U.S. military issues a daily body count. Critics point to conflicting statistics. Victory is claimed, but the war keeps enlarging. Soldier Matt Martin.
That should do it.
They loved high body counts. Well, sometimes you exaggerated a little. And the more regular you were, regular service, regular Marine, regular Army, the higher the body count was. We had a colonel call in, and he was all excited. He said, "What's the body count? What's the body count?" Because we had called in a lot of heavy artillery, you know. We were really putting a job on this one village. So he wanted a real heavy body count. Well, this second Louis we had with us, he had come up through the ranks, and he yelled over 300. So then the radio man said, "You can't give them an even number. They're not going to go for an even number." So he said, "Well, okay, 311. So they called in and said, "We got 311 flat-out deads, sure kills." Well, this officer loved it. He started yelling, "Great, great, did a great job." Well, actually what had happened is one of our Jeeps had turned over and killed this old man. And we had one sure kill because that sucker was dead. And it was an accident, you know. But we called in this heavy kill report. It was always better if you had a good kill count because everything come your way. You could get better supplies, you get steaks, and you get booze once in a while. Everything would come your way.
Westmoreland confidently predicts progress in the war, but trust in his strategy is severely shaken by the communist Tet Offensive. At great cost, 80,000 communist troops attack 100 towns and cities. American fatalities exceed 500 in 1 week. Westmoreland calls the Tet Offensive a military failure. He then asks for another 200,000 troops. Critic Arthur Schlesinger.
General Westmoreland's only solution for such thing, for every time he got into more trouble, he asked for more men, culminating in the final request after the Tet Offensive in 1968. And the kinds of recommendations he made were finally recognized by the United States government as futile.
A military analyst, Brian Jenkins, compiled several official studies on what was wrong.
We may not have won, but we were always in a sense winning, whether one dealt with the body count or whatever aspect of it was, so that these successes were in turn rewarded, or at least there were damn few visible failures. The other part of it, of course, that is that the military success, when there was military success, measured either in geographic terms, occupying something or defeating something, did not translate into political success. People fought over and many died taking hills that meant nothing 3 days later. It wasn't in the sense of that occupying terrain had great meaning.
A month after Tet, Westmoreland is removed from command and promoted to Chief of Staff. President Johnson freezes troop levels. Former Assistant Secretary of Defense, Paul Nietzsche.
Well, I know him to be an absolutely outstanding man. Man of great character and honor. So that isn't the questioned issue. The questioned issue is whether he was as subtle a general and as wise in his dispositions and in his actions as one could have hoped for.
His military predictions were wrong, and his military strategy was wrong. He was trying to fight a war of attrition, of large units, a conventional war against guerrillas. I think it can be said that General Westmoreland was the most disastrous American general since Custer.
And throughout the war, we never lost a battle. We had some companies that were badly hurt through ambushes and associated with combat actions, but we did not lose a battle of consequence. In my opinion, by early, during the 68, 69 time frame, we had as fine a military force as America has ever assembled. A force that could have brought the war to an end if it hadn't been for political decisions that prohibited that. Well, of course, I've read Kipling, and I'm very fond of him because he's kind of the soldier's poet. The end of the fight is a tombstone white with the name of the late deceased. And the epitaph, drear, a fool lies here who tries to hustle the East. And having read Kipling, I was aware of that, and I didn't take it quite to heart. I was center stage, and the war became considerably unpopular, and needless to say, a lot of that rubbed off on me. I was not elated with some of the venom that was cast my way. But as a soldier prays for peace, he must be prepared to cope with the hardships of war and bear its scars. And I have borne figuratively scars.
Between 1965 and 68, 30,000 American troops die in Vietnam. Westmoreland leaves Vietnam July 68. American strategy then centers on the means of withdrawal. The policy is called Vietnamization, handing back the war to the South Vietnamese. But ending the war takes 4 years.
I gave the effort to the best that I had, an effort born of experience in 2 other wars and many years in uniform. I did my utmost to carry out my duties loyally and conscientiously and professionally. And with the satisfaction of knowing that I conducted myself that way, I have no regrets, and I have nothing to apologize for.